I want to spend a few minutes talking about what happened at the convention. And we're on page 25, if you would. You know, when the founders came to Philadelphia, it was a frightening experience. And that's your blank there in row number 1. Frightening. What were they frightened about? Well, letter A, the unity that existed before the war, or during the war, had disappeared. You remember what Jefferson was afraid of? If you don't know what to do with freedom, it can be rough. And that's what happened. They were away from King George, and they just kind of went their own way. Unity had disappeared. Letter B, there was deep depression, runaway inflation. You know that there were scores of entities, including the states, printing our paper money. Wasn't worth anything, had no backing on it. Even the British, our enemies, were printing our money. Can you believe that? And it doesn't worth anything. Let's see if we can print something and get some of these gullible Americans to take it. Letter C, the states were quarreling over boundaries in the west and fishing rights in the east. Letter D, the states were actually treating one another as foreign countries. You want to go from Connecticut to Massachusetts? Guess what you got to go through? Customs. Customs. See, the problem is they were all out of money. There's okay, how do we raise money? Well, you can't tax the people, they don't have any money. So we're going to set up little border customs and charge people for bringing goods into our country. Well, that's what nations do, not states of a union. That's what was happening. On the next page, letter E, Spain was threatening to seize territory along the Mississippi River. Letter F, England would not remove her troops from our northern border. Did you know that Washington had been president for 7 years, almost the end of his 8 years, when, under the Jay Treaty, England finally said, okay, we'll take our troops home from our Canadian border. England was so sure this thing was going to fall apart. You can't govern yourself, not without me. I have the divine right to rule. You know that story. And as soon as it fell apart, King George wanted to be right back. Letter G, such hostility had developed that New England was threatening to secede from the Union. And what was worse, the southern states said, good riddance. We don't need you either. That's real unity here. And letter H, it was obvious the Articles of Confederation were a failure. I want you to turn back, if you would, to page 23. I need to review this with you just for a few minutes, because do you remember what the founders were trying to find on the political spectrum? What do we call it? The balanced center. Remember, that's what we're trying to find here. Where is it? Hadn't been found before. Where are we going to find it? Well, but they just came off of this King George thing by declaring the Declaration of Independence. So the first government they had under the Articles, they said, we are so tired of this kingly government. We know that everybody who becomes a king becomes a tyrant. So under our Articles of Confederation, we're not even going to have an executive. So your blank there for number 1 at the bottom is no executive. No executive. Number 2, we don't want any federal judge telling us what we have to do. So number 2, it had no federal judicial system. Number 3, every government we give the power to tax to runs away with it. So under the Articles, the national government will have no power to tax. That's number 3. And number 4, we don't want anybody telling us what to do without our consent. So there is no power in the national government under the Articles to enforce any decree. Well, you just try to fight a war under that condition. And it almost made us lose the Revolutionary War. And if there's one person that knew the absolute necessity of eventually giving more energy, he called it, to the federal government, it was George Washington. Out there in the field, seeing his men die, starving, freezing. He would write a report to Congress every week during those 8 years, and would beg Congress to send reinforcements, to send food, to send blankets, clothing, and so forth. And all Congress could do is say, well, we've asked the states to send it. And you get Massachusetts saying, well, we'll send ours when Connecticut says sends hers. How in the world do you conduct a war in that condition? I don't know if you've read much about Washington. There is, well, our book labels him the most indispensable man. I'm not sure anyone else could have done it. Could have kept this thing together without Washington. I just, when we meet him in the next life, I've got a lot of things to tell him. What an incredible man. And if you've been to the Capitol in D.C., in the rotunda, you know, there's a lot of paintings around the rotunda perimeter. But you look straight up, 180 feet in the air, right under the Capitol dome. You know what's there? We talked about this on the Glenn Beck show. It's called the apotheosis of George Washington. That's a Greek word meaning the raising of a mortal being to a godlike quality. And that's what they felt about this man. He was so honest. He turned down power when it was offered to him. You can trust him totally. That's what that painting is. He's ascending to heaven, although there's something godly about him. And George Washington. But if you look on the top of page 24 at the little graph there, founders are trying to find a balanced center. They had swung the government from where it was under King George, under ruler's law, clear over, and they missed it. But they didn't know where it was. So this was their first try. What they found during the war is that under the Articles, our government was really too close to what? Anarchy. See that? But you know, as I've studied this time period, I think to myself, perhaps we had to go through it. And I relate that to today. Perhaps we have to go through some pretty rough times to get our frame of reference back. They did it in their day. Why should we be any different? Have you noticed how the good Lord lets us do that? Rather than just handing us everything on a silver platter, He'll let us go through the ringer. So we'll appreciate it. And anyway, they went through the ringer. So, back on page 26, Roman numeral 2, it was almost a miracle that the convention ever took place. Washington had asked all the states, let's get together and add energy to the federal government. He wrote letters. Nothing came of it. That's your blank for letter B. Nothing. Then an interesting thing happened on the Potomac River. Virginia and Maryland, that border the river, as you know, began arguing about fishing rights on the Potomac. And they got so angry with each other, they didn't really want to go in each other's state to talk about the problem. So Washington, when he heard about this, he said, you people come on over to Mount Vernon. We'll sit on my back porch, which, as you may know, overlooks the Potomac. That's a great, beautiful view there. And we'll talk about this problem and we'll work it out. So, because this was the great general, they came and they worked out the problem, and they said, you know, this isn't bad. We ought to all get together, all the states, in a trade conference. That's your blank for letter C, trade conference, and see if we can't work out some of these problems. So that's what was planned at Annapolis. And letter D, only problem was only 5 states showed up. Well, what can you do under the Articles with 5 states? Nothing. It required unanimity, remember? So they said, all right, we got to do something about these Articles. Let's meet next year, 1787, in Philadelphia, in May, and see if we can do something about these Articles. That's how the convention was set, the time and the place. And so, down at the bottom, letter B, 26, 73 delegates were appointed to come. Only 55 actually showed up. 55. All the states were invited, and 12 came, one never did show up. Who was that? Rhode Island. So they started calling her Rogue Island. R-O-G-U-E, Rogue, as you're playing, Rhode Island. And letter E, Ben Franklin was 81 years old, near the end of his long life. He was 81. And then under letter F, there were two of the founders that we've quoted here already this morning that weren't at the convention. Number one is John Adams. Where was he? He was our minister to England. And number two, Thomas Jefferson. Where was he, the great Jefferson? Well, he was our minister to France. Trying to work out problems there. Letter G, James Madison was 8 years younger than Jefferson. 8 years. But is considered, letter H, the most able leader at the convention. Why was he the most able? Have you seen this movie, More Perfect Union? How many have seen this? You have this? Yeah. I love this movie. This is, well, it was recognized by the National Bicentennial Commission in 1987 as the best reproduction of what happened in that long, hot summer in Philadelphia. It's called A More Perfect Union. And a few years ago, someone made it possible for us to mail one of these as a result of public law, which was passed a few years ago, requiring every school in the United States to teach something about the Constitution during Constitution Week. Can you imagine that? And so teachers would say, have you got any material we can use? And somebody made it possible for us to send one of these to every school in the United States. Over 100,000. Since then, schools have been ordering these in quantity. And just a great video. I show this to my class. I've seen a number of times. Great spirit of these men in this. This really ought to be part of your I Love America DVD shelf, right? And but it opens with James Madison sitting at his desk, and a knock comes at the door. Opens it up. Yes, it's two men there with a crate between them. Bring it in, open it up, and they open it. He stands up, lifts the cover, and reaches in and takes the note off of its contents. Reads the note, says, "God bless you, Mr. Jefferson." For what? Who's seen this? Who knows what was in the crate? Books. Dozens of books from Jefferson. Wherever Jefferson went, he had to have his books. Remember him saying, "I cannot live without my books." Well, he was the tutor for James Madison. He said, "Mr. Madison, if you'll read these books, you'll be ready for the convention." And so Madison read them. And it was Jefferson really that was behind a lot of it, but he was over in France. Anyway, great. By the way, this is, I don't know how much this is. You get it for $10 back there, or buy 10 or more of these to give away, $3. You gotta get this out, right? Okay. Now, I want you to turn to page 28. We're going to go over most history books that are taught from in schools say that the Constitution is a bundle of compromises. Well, there were some compromises, which we'll mention here. But actually, most items in the Constitution were not reached by compromise. They were reached by what we call consensus. What's the difference? What's consensus? Consensus? General agreement. Even if you start at different positions, you talk it out until you come to an agreement. For example, I think we should have an executive. Okay, that was the lesson they learned. You better have an executive in your government. Okay, we're going to have an executive. Next question. How many executives should we have in the executive? What do you mean, how many? See, we never had one before. How many are you going to have? And Governor Randolph from Virginia stands up and he says, I think we should have 3 presidents. One for the northern states, one for the middle states, one for the southern states. There's safety in numbers, you know, safety in numbers. 3 is better than 1, can I convince you? Unless you have a James Wilson in your group, and he was there from Pennsylvania, he stands up and he said, Governor Randolph, you say there's safety in numbers? Don't you remember the 30 tyrants of Greece? Anybody know that story? 30 times, where Greece at one time had an executive with 30 people in it. Well, who gets the blame when something goes wrong? The other 29. I didn't do it. It's their fault. So you can't fix responsibility in a multiple executive. And so Randolph later, he said, you know, Mr. Wilson, I agree with you. If we can limit the power of the president, I will agree we should have one president. See what that is? That's consensus. You talk it out, and you learn lessons of history, and you reason it out, and you come to an agreement. That's consensus. Now, what's compromise? Compromise? It's when you give up something you don't want to give up for the sake of going along and getting things done. That's compromise. And there's 3 major compromises in the document, and here they are. We're on page 28. Number 1, how soon the national government should begin to regulate or abolish slavery. This was a tough issue. You might be interested to know that nearly every one of the 55 men at that convention knew, even the ones from the southern states, knew that slavery one day had to go. But they said, if you put a prohibition of slavery into the Constitution, don't expect our states to ratify it. We're talking about Georgia and the 2 Carolinas. Our whole economies are built on this. You can't just cut it and expect us to ratify this document. So they said, okay. Well, they said, you've got to give us time to work it out. Okay, how much time do you need? Give us 20 years. 20 years. So they put right in the Constitution, not until 1808, which would have been 20 years hence, can the federal government prohibit the importation of slaves. And it was understood, although some of us wish they would have put it in writing, it was understood that by then the states would do their part in getting rid of slavery, and the issue would be open. Do you see how the founders had answers to problems, folks? I mean, they really did. You go down, go down, go down. What happened? Well, one of my relatives invented the cotton gin, Eli Whitney. Well, you know that? All of a sudden, gotta have more cotton. Gotta have more plantations. You can gin it fast. I mean, we got the cotton became king. And the wishes of the founders with regards to slavery took a back seat. And as you know, we had to solve it in another way. But the founders had an answer to that problem. It was to unite and then continue to work out our problem. Somebody told me in a seminar a while back, and said, yeah, but they should have prohibited slavery, and if some didn't want to join, that's their business. I said, are you telling me that you have to be perfect to join the union? Well, I said, let me ask you, are you married? Enough said, right? I mean, you wait till everybody's perfect before you marry? You marry and you continue to work out the problems. Right? Anyway, I think you got the point. Anyway, that was the first compromise. Number 2, whether the votes in Congress should be according to individual states or the population of the states. You know about that, between the House and the Senate. And number 3, whether the federal government should have authority to regulate interstate commerce. This is most interesting. They did not want to give the federal government the power over any aspect of commerce within the states. Now, that wasn't the federal responsibility. But, they said, if a state sets up boundaries like they had already done and started charging people customs to come in, who's to prevent that? Another state? See, that would lead, it could lead to civil war. So they said, we're going to give the power to regulate interstate commerce to the federal government to do that one thing. To ensure the flow of goods between the states. That's the only reason that interstate commerce clause is in the Constitution. And there's quote after quote from the founders to show it. I'll show you how that got messed up. So, those are the 3 major compromises in the document. Almost everything else was a result of consensus. Okay? And down the bottom, you see the two plans that were presented, the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan. And then on the top of the next page, Alexander Hamilton, he stands up, and he's got a plan. See what you think of Hamilton's plan. On the top of 29 here, Hamilton is your first plan. Number one, he says, I think we should have a single executive chosen for life. You don't like that? Number two, he says, I think senators should be chosen for life. Somebody said they are, aren't they? Number three, House of Representatives for 3 years. 3 years. Number four, he says, I think the governors of the state should be appointed by the federal government. Huh? This is Hamilton. What does this sound like? What model does this emulate? This is very British. Hamilton loved the British model. This is very British. Have you ever been in a meeting where when someone spoke, you felt obliged to applaud even though you didn't agree with them? We've all been in those situations, haven't we? Apparently, that's what happened here. Because, Madison writes, Hamilton's plan was approved by all and supported by none. And it was at this point that Hamilton got angry and went home. And he was the last delegate from New York to leave. There was no delegate from New York after this, except at the very end when Hamilton was persuaded by Washington to return. Hamilton did. He couldn't even vote on the document because it had to be two of the state there to vote. But at least he said, may I at least sign the document? And so he was permitted to sign. That's why there's only one signature from New York on the Constitution. That's Alexander Hamilton. Well, letter C, Madison, after all these plans were being presented, stands up and gives this incredible speech called Constitution for the Ages. This movie picks it up very well. He says, generations unborn will look back to us for freedom and protection of their rights. We cannot disappoint them. We must move on. Great speech. Letter D, the convention at that time fell into what is known as the crisis period. Crisis period. For example, number one, just trying to decide how to elect the president required more than 60 different ballots, discussions, ballots. Okay, you're going to have one president. Well, you're going to have an executive. You're going to have one president. Now, how are you going to elect him? That was a big question. How are you going to elect him? And there were a lot of proposals. That's why it took 60 ballots. There were a lot of proposals. For example, how about letting the senators elect the president? Would you like that? They didn't either. No. Well, then how about the House members? No, that's too close also. Well, another suggestion. How about the governors of the states electing the president? No. Well, then how about having the people elect the president? No. Sorry about that. No, they said, no, the people won't know really what the candidates are about. They won't really understand the issues. They will actually vote mostly on emotion. They said, no, that the people won't be in a situation to really make good choices in that kind of an office because it's too far removed from them. Interesting. So they came up after all of this discussion with this incredible system known as the Electoral College system, where each state, every 4 years, each state will choose a small committee. That committee has one responsibility: to find, interview, really get to know the candidates, and at a time in December, meet in their state capitals, not all together. They didn't want big conventions because bad things happen there. Meet in their respective state capitals and vote for president. And the next time Congress is in session, the next year, they open the ballots and count the votes and see who's president. That's known as the Electoral College system. Now, at our school, we've been going for 15 years, just finished. In the first couple of years, we had student body elections. You remember those in your high school? Boy, you keep going and you pass the petitions and everybody gets excited. They wear buttons and we wear uniforms at our school, and so you get all plastered and everything, and the walls are plastered, stuff all over the sidewalks, and everybody trying to get somebody's vote, so they're handing out candy. And then it's time for speeches. We got some pretty creative kids at our school. They don't just give speeches, they give productions. They get up here on stage and with their little group, and boy, they put on a show. They throw out candy, and then the candidate comes and gives a little speech, and root beer in the drinking fountains all year long. That's a little exaggeration, but not much. And I'm sitting here thinking, looking at this, and I think, this is crazy. They were trying to teach these students about America, and what they're doing sounds like real life. So I get the staff together and I say, this isn't right. Let's see if we can emulate what the founders wanted to do in the electoral system. So you know what we do now? We've been doing it for 12 years. Every homeroom, there's 25 of them, elects one person as an elector. And they know that one person will help choose the student body officers. So you got 25 of them. There's 25 homerooms. They meet 3 times. First time they meet, they nominate. And one of them might say, well, you know, so-and-so, she's really organized. She's got a lot of great ideas. But she hasn't said she wanted to be president. Right? Put her name down. If you want to nominate her, put her name down. That's what they did in Washington, right? They didn't want me to leave. Put his name down. Okay? Another one might say, well, I know somebody he wants to be. He's really good. Put his name down. So you get this list. And the next meeting, you interview. I've seen some of those interviews. Oh, what would you do about this policy? How would you change this? How would you persuade Mr. Taylor to do this? And so forth. These kids will grill them. And the next time they meet, they vote secret ballot. And by the end of the day, the votes are counted. We get on the PA system and announce the officers for student body for next year. Now notice, no campaigning. No messing up the campus. No empty promises. No dollars spent to persuade, you know. And we have had some pretty good student body officers. You think about that in our modern system. What would it be like if we had it the way the founders set it up? No campaigning. No multi-hundreds of millions of dollars raised to try to persuade you, to try to change the emotion of the people over television, to package the candidates as they do. None of that. Somebody said one time, well, yeah, but what if we get a real bad guy in there under that system? Enough said on that. Anyway, that's just how our little school has proven once again the founders' wisdom. It's great. It's marvelous. Well, anyway, this crisis period was rough. It was rough on Washington. Top of page 30, he wrote at this point, I almost despair of seeing a favorable issue to the proceedings of the convention, and do therefore repent having had any agency in the business. What is he saying here? I wish I weren't here. This is the great Washington. He's the one that wanted this. And some say he looked as grim as he did at Valley Forge, and that was pretty bad. It was at this time that wise old Benjamin Franklin gave one of his 2 speeches that he gave. He only gave 2. First one was on the kind of people we should elect to public office and how much we should pay them. That's a great speech. But this one is his famous plea for prayer, where he said, in essence, the longer I live, sir, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it possible that an empire can rise without his aid? He said, if we do not involve the help of God, we will succeed at this political building no better than the builders of Babel. So then he made a motion. He said, I therefore beg leave to move that from this day forward, before we begin the business of the day, we invite a clergyman from the city to come in and offer a prayer on our behalf. Now, it would be nice for us to say, boy, when they started praying at convention, everything worked. That'd be nice to say, wouldn't it? You can't say that. Because his motion was defeated. Say, whoa. What's the matter? Don't they believe in prayer? Oh, yeah, they did. All of them did. Matter of fact, there's a couple of ministers among them. Any one of them could have given a great prayer. But that was not the motion. This is parliamentary procedure. You got to vote on the motion. Two situations there. Number one, they already voted. Nobody comes and goes except delegates. And number two, it was tradition that you pay the clergy for their services. And guess what? There wasn't any of in the field. No money. Some of them there were on borrowed money. So his motion was defeated. But Madison writes, that seemed to have such an effect on the delegates that surely in their private times they were much more reflectful, maybe even prayerful. And things did start to happen. So on page 31 at the top, well, let's see. Enough details were worked out that the whole thing was turned over to a committee on detail. Top of page 31 is your blank detail. There's enough of the items worked out. Compromises started to be made, consensus started to be made, and anyway, progress was really happening. So they turned it over to this committee on detail, and it put the Constitution in a very rough form. Then it was turned back to the convention for 4 weeks, letter F. By this time, 11 of the 55 delegates had gone home. And letter G, on September the 8th, it was turned over again to a committee on style. And that was to put the Constitution in its final stylish form. And we're so grateful that in that committee was a man by the name of Gouverneur Morris. Gouverneur Morris, and that's your blank there. She letter G, Gouverneur Morris. He was a 36-year-old lawyer from Pennsylvania. Gouverneur Morris was an incredible guy. He had a wooden leg, and it didn't look like a leg, just a round shaft. And he kept it polished, very proud of it. And, when they applauded, either thumped on the table or applauded like this. That's what Gouverneur Morris did. And wood on wood. If you've been to Independence Hall, seen those big planks. Wood on wood. Boy, everybody knew Gouverneur approved. So what happened? Look at on page 31, the Constitution. They finally found the what? The balanced center. Of course, they weren't even sure that was, but they felt good about it. Balanced center. It was pulled over to the center. In letter B, where the separation of powers was both vertical and horizontal. What do we mean by vertical separation of powers? Vertical? What does that mean? Federal, state, county, city. Right? Remember what Jefferson was saying? You divide it up vertically. You assign to the level of government that which it can do the best. That's vertical. That's federalism. Vertical separation. And horizontal. What does that mean? Horizontal? You separate the three great powers. The founder said, if you give somebody the power to make a law, enforce a law, and interpret a law all in one, what do you have? Tyranny, tyrant. So you separate those powers. Put checks and balances between them. Horizontally and vertically with checks and balances. You see this, folks? This is the genius of this document. I'm not sure any one person could have come up with it. It is so incredible. The more I study that separation, because the founders did not deny human nature. Remember natural law? You take it like it is and you deal with it. This separation of powers is incredible. Let me just mention this. You have a power to make law, enforce law, and interpret law. Jefferson said, if you keep the checks and balances working, Human nature will operate to keep the government in check. I ask you, what is there about human nature? What element of human nature would keep it in check? If there's one particular element of human nature, he mentioned this, Jefferson, it starts with a J. What is it? Jealousy. See how you're not denying human nature, you're using human nature. The jealousy of one branch that will say, hey, you can't do that, that's my job, and they will have the power to stop them if the checks and balances are in place. Do you see this, folks? This is incredible. How human nature is used to keep our government in the right balanced center. It's amazing to me as I study this. Now, over on the next page, top of page 31, is a quote from James Madison. This is from the Federalist Papers. There's hardly any other paragraph in the whole founding era that I love more than this one, because this is filled with, what should I say, pure principles of political gospel, if I can say it that way. See if you don't agree with me. We're going to go through every sentence here, sentence by sentence, and see if you don't agree with me. He says, the powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. All right? What does that mean? If powers are few and definable, what does that mean you can do with them?
Understand.
You can list them. They're few and defined. You can actually list them. So, as I showed you in Article 1, Section 8, where it says Congress has the power to, you can actually list them. There's 20 of them. 20 powers to Congress. You go over to Article 2, and guess what? You can find the 6 areas of responsibility of the president. 6, not 6,000. 20, not 20,000. 6, not 6,000. They're right there. You go to Article 3, the judiciary, and guess what? 11 kinds of cases assigned to the federal courts. 11, not 11,000. Will you remember those numbers? 20, 6, and 11. Those are few and defined powers. 20, 6, and 11. Okay? Go on to the next sentence. Those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite. All right, what does that mean? What does that mean you couldn't do, even if you wanted to? You couldn't list them, the powers of the state governments, because there are so many. If you tried to, you'd leave some out. Now, I haven't read your state constitution, but I can almost guarantee you 2 things about it. Number one, it's much longer than the federal, right? You know that. Much longer than the federal. And number 2, there is no specific listing of the kinds of things a legislator can do, the executive, the governor can do, or kinds of cases the courts can hear. You won't find it in there because they are numerous and indefinite. Isn't that interesting? Okay, go to the next sentence. The former, meaning the federal, will be exercised principally on external objects as war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce. What does that mean? That means that the federal government's main job is to what? Protect the people of the United States, the states, against foreign whatever. I like to picture the federal government as an umbrella. What's the job of an umbrella? In your state, it might be to keep the rain off. In my state, it's to keep the sunshine on, right? Whatever. In other words, protect what's under it. The federal government is like an umbrella, leaving the states free, get this concept, to compete for the best level of freedom. Whoa. How would you like that for a campaign? Somebody running for office here in Missouri? Come to Missouri. You'll have more freedom here than anywhere. We got lower taxes. We got less regulation on business. Want to start a business? This is the place to be. We'll have better protection of property than any place else in the Union. Come to Missouri. Now, if you want giveaway programs, we don't have any of those. Sorry. So stay in. Oh. Yeah, okay. It's not California, it's Massachusetts. Where are we going? Yeah. Isn't this amazing? What kind of people would you draw? The kind you want, right? Creative, industrious. And all of a sudden, I'm living there in Arizona. My neighbor, he's packed up. He said, where are you going? He said, I'm going to Missouri. What are you going there for? You know, there's great people and it's a beautiful place. He said, have you heard of the freedom there? And my other neighbor, where are you going? I'm going to Missouri. Have you heard of the freedom? What am I going to do? I'm going to go to my governor and legislators and say, look, we are losing our best people. Now let's get with it. Get this competition going for freedom. I mean, that's what we need to be doing. Under the protection of the federal government that keeps our borders secure and all that kind of stuff. Right? This is the founders' formula, folks. What do we do instead? Well, you know, and I just saw this the other day again with this statistic. Arizona, you know, we need to be ashamed of ourselves because we're the 49th state on the list of what we pay teachers. Now that's awful. Now we need to raise taxes so we won't be so embarrassed compared to the other states. We're competing on the wrong basis here. We need to compete for freedom. Anyway. All right, look at the last sentence in that paragraph. It says, the powers reserved to the several states will extend to all the objects which, in the ordinary course of affairs, concern the lives, liberties, and prosperity of the state. I ask you, according to that statement, what level of government is the highest level of government that should be involved, if that, in your life, your liberty, your property, the air you breathe, the water you drink, where your kids go to school, and 100 other things. Highest state, if that. Isn't that what this says here? See why I love this paragraph. This really has it all. St. Mass, federal state. All right. So in 1787, they said, we're going to come back next Monday and sign the document. That Monday happened to have been September 17th. And that's when they got together to sign the document. That's why today, September 17th, is known as Citizenship Day or Constitution Day. The beginning of Constitution Week, which we encourage people to celebrate in their community, all of your schools. You can go to your mayors and have them proclaim Constitution Week, and they love to do that, no matter what party they are. Everybody loves the Constitution, right? And anyway, so 41, your blank is 41 out of the original 55 delegates met to sign the document. And 3 of them refused to sign it. And there you see the list. Because it didn't have a what? A Bill of Rights, which is your blank at the bottom, Bill of Rights. And it's kind of interesting. Madison said, why do we need a Bill of Rights? We haven't given the federal government enough power to trample on your rights. We've only given them very enumerated right, 2611 kind. Given them very few. And it was George Mason, one of these 3, who stood up and made a classic statement. He said, but they will. They will violate your rights. He said, I'd rather chop off my right hand than put it to that document without a Bill of Rights. Was he correct? Yeah, even with the Bill of Rights. So, as the delegates signed, Madison carefully watched. And top of page 33, as Franklin signed, Madison wrote, the old man wept. What's he crying? Well, if you read the real Benjamin Franklin, you'll read his incredible attempts over 30 years to bring this union about. 30 years. And it finally happened just a little bit before he died. And he was crying.